The strongest manufacturing substrate is not a new alloy or a better robot. It is a record you can still trust years later. In the environments that punish mistakes, records are not paperwork. They are part of the production line. In regulated GXP operations, training records, staff records, operating procedures, and retrievable documentation act like control surfaces. They decide who is allowed to do what, under which procedure version, with what proof. That flips a common industrial instinct. We tend to optimize for cycle time first. Slow substrate manufacturing asks a sharper question. What if speed is not the dominant variable, once you price in endurance, traceability, and authority? Here is the first key finding. Deliberate timing can increase output, not just reduce risk. In 1959, deliberate discharge cycling was reported to increase production under specific operating conditions. The point is not the niche mechanism. The point is that slower can be a productivity move when it stabilizes the system. A paced loop can protect yield, prevent cascading defects, and keep a process inside its safe window. That idea shows up again in sustainable manufacturing and foundry practice. The emphasis there is yield protection, reduced scrap and rework, controlled process windows, and stable operational discipline. In those worlds, a defect that propagates can be more expensive than waiting. Delay can be cheaper than rework, and rework can be cheaper than downstream failure. Once you see the full cost stack, maximum throughput stops looking like the default. Second finding. The durable record system is the real hardening layer, not because it stores data, but because it preserves authority. Think of what must remain reconstructable after staff turnover, vendor migration, equipment retirement, or a legal challenge. You need documented competence. You need the procedure that was in force, not the one you wish had been in force. You need verification gates, escalation history, and timing decisions. You need enough context to recreate the production state, even when the original team is gone. In other words, the substrate is the ability to say, years later, who did what, when, under whose authorization, and based on which evidence. If you cannot answer that, you do not have industrial memory. You have vibes, screenshots, and institutional amnesia. Third finding. Competence is not an HR artifact. It is a live production constraint. A 2007 framing in GXP practice made training and staff records a formal control layer for compliant operations. Pair that with deliberate practice research, which treats performance improvement as structured repetition, staged preparation, and feedback cadence. Together, they point to a practical architecture. Authorization should depend on current, retrievable competence tied to the exact procedure version used. Competence expires. It needs requalification cadence, and it needs linkage to exceptions and audit findings. Now add modern automation. Even in highly instrumented factories, the tempting fantasy is that sensor logs are enough. They are not. A sensor can tell you what happened. It cannot fully tell you what it meant, who was responsible, or whether the action was permitted. That is why the record has to include authority, procedure meaning, and exception handling, not just timestamps and telemetry. Fourth finding. Delay itself needs governance, because delay can be protective or negligent. The same "we waited" can mean "we verified," or it can mean "we ignored." Legal analysis of deliberate indifference in institutional settings makes a brutal point. Timing decisions can become liability-bearing when an institution fails to respond appropriately under known risk. Duration is not the only issue. Documented attention, duty of care posture, and escalation behavior matter. So for leaders, the research need becomes an operational need. You want a delay taxonomy that separates protective verification, capacity backlog, escalation failure, and negligent delay. Without that, organizations will mislabel backlogs as care and label care as inefficiency. Both errors are expensive. Fifth finding: the biggest bottleneck risk is not that you add verification. It is that you add the wrong kind. Record systems can become throughput killers if every gate is treated as permanent, universal, and equally critical. The answer is not to abandon deliberateness. The answer is risk tiering. Decide which steps require independent review, hold time, or staged approval, because failure costs dominate throughput gains. Then make those steps explicit, funded, and auditable. Notice what keeps repeating. Ownership matters. Records fail in the seams between quality, operations, legal, IT, training, and cybersecurity. If nobody owns production memory, it degrades quietly until the day it is needed most. That is why a named accountable owner for record integrity and audit reconstruction is not bureaucracy. It is resilience.